can take a look at, Clearman's radical plasticity hypothesis, Tononi's integrated information. Basically, they all converge on what consciousness is doing is its higher order relevance realization, which of course is what working memory is doing. Like the stuff that our colleague Lynn Hasher was talking about at work. It's not just Miller's holding space, because that doesn't really account for why chunking is so important. No, it's functional. It's sort of the last ditch survey of how good is my relevance realization before I commit to action in the world, right? I think salience is actually just relevance to your working memory in that fashion. So the functionality, okay, so let's say that there's a growing convergence, remember plausibility, from many different people onto the function of consciousness is higher order recursive relevance realization. Your unconscious has done some preliminary relevance realization, and then you do the, yes, but this is the demanding, and you ratchet up the relevance realization. Is that plausible? Okay, now if you give me that, right, I can start to talk a lot about the phenomenology of consciousness beyond the functionality. But I need to make a distinction. I need to make an important distinction that has not been, well, I would argue hasn't been made very well, and therefore there's a deep equivocation and confound. You need to make a distinction between adjectival qualia are the felt experience things. You need to make a distinction between the adjectival qualia and the adverbial qualia. Adjectival qualia are greenness, blueness, the ones that philosophers love to talk about. Adverbial qualia are things like here-ness, now-ness, togetherness. Now you say, well, why would I ever need that? Okay, so Politicians work.
Why are those adverbial?
Because they're modifications of how you are connected to the world. They are not specific properties.
Okay, so does that correspond to a noun? That's a noun-verb distinction in some sense.
Right.
So it's what things are versus the different. What would you say? Modification qualities of their function.
How they could co-emerge in being and in your consciousness. So let's talk about two pieces of empirical evidence that support what I'm saying. I'm not just drawing this as speculation. One is, and I've been in this state, and it's widely reported, many different people across many different variables, culturally, history, you can get into what Foreman calls the pure consciousness event. So you're not conscious of anything, you're not even conscious of consciousness, you're just purely conscious. It's remember when we talked about you can step back and you can step back until you can't step back any further because you'd be trying to step back in consciousness into unconsciousness, right? Now in the pure consciousness event, there is no greenness, there is no blueness, there is no blackness, there are no objects, there are no things, but you don't black out. What there is there's a sense of here-ness, but it's pure here-ness, eternity, right? And presence, I should say. And now-ness is that sense of eternity, and then there's everything is one, unity, togetherness. So the here-ness and the now-ness and the togetherness don't go away, even though the adjectival qualia do, which tells you the adjectival qualia are not necessary for consciousness, but the adverbial ones.
So do you think of that as an experience of something akin to the ground of being?
Yes, because here, when you're doing,
is that the name of God that was announced to Moses? Is that the same idea? Because the name is I am that I am. Right? I was that I am.
Well, I want to try and answer that, and I want to try and so I was at. I went to I went to the Respond retreat and in Vermont, and I was giving my talk on relevance realization, and I was getting great questions from monks, and I was actually interacting with other theorists, and I came to what I think is an important insight. So your system is doing relevance realization, and that is giving you the complexification of the world. It's giving you the world of things, but as you said, organized, like right? So it's giving you this. But you can come to and one of the things relevance realization is interested in is relevance realizing. That's what an insight is. You realize, oh, my way of realizing what's relevant was actually wrong. I have to restructure.
Yeah.
Right? So it's intrinsically, because it's intrinsically evolving and self-correcting, it is intrinsically interested in itself, okay? So I can do relevance realization on the world, and that is relevance realization of beings. But relevance realization has to realize its own irrelevance with respect to being. It has to you have to stop trying to thingify your experience.
That's movement up Jacob's. Okay, so, okay, so in the Exodus story, what happens with Moses is that he's walking through the desert, so he's confused in some sense, and something attracts his attention.
Yes.
Right, it's the burning bush. And it doesn't like announce itself in some magnificent way. It glimmers in the shadows of his perception. But then he investigates it. So imagine this, imagine that something glimmers to attract your attention. That's Mercury, by the way. Right?
Yes, yes.
He's the winged messenger of the
Hermes,
gods.
yes.
Hermes, trying to attract your attention. So now you pursue that, and now you pursue it deeply. And the deeper you pursue it, the farther you get away from the particulars of the phenomenon itself, and the closer you get to something like generalized being. And that seems to be the idea that's implicit in that story of the burning bush and the announcement of the name of God.
Yes, but so what happened, this is from Gregory of Nyssa and his work on Moses going up, right, at the mountain, and all the way to Nicholas of Cusa, right? The burning bush is inherently paradoxical, right?
Yes, right, because it's something that is destroying itself but is maintained.
Right. And so it's underneath generation and destruction. It's underneath all of the mechanisms by which being is particularized. It is trying to point, I am that I am, or actually, I will be what I will be. Right. And so it is trying to point to the ground of being as opposed to the world. And what does Moses try and comprehend?
And it's a paradox, as you said. It's so interesting, because a paradox is pointing the way to that. That's sort of, you talked, I think, in your lecture in Ralston about the idea that the parables in the New Testament are basically Zen koans, right? They're paradoxes that are designed to produce a state of insight, and that's the grip of imagination by relevance realization and a pointer to something that's beyond at the same time.
Exactly. You get gripped by the paradox. And does Moses try to comprehend it? No, he takes off his shoes and he goes into reverence.
Right. That's why he takes off his shoes.
Yes.
Because he knows he's standing on holy ground.
And so the attempt to name is abandoned. Even that doesn't mean you stop naming. It's ridiculous.
Well, that would be the abandonment of sanity in some real sense.
There's a moment when the relevance realization, can point to its own irrelevance when you are trying to not grip anything. You're trying to be opened to the ground of everything.
Right.
So that's how I would answer.
And the utility, so now the utility of being open to the ground of everything, let me lay this out. You tell me what you think about this. So you might say, well, does everything have to converge on one? That's the monotheistic question in some real sense. Well, let's say, forget that question for a minute. Let's look at the alternative. Things don't converge.
Yes.
Okay, so what's the psychological state associated with non-convergence? Well, there's two. If I have a multitude of goals